Your customers are watching every move you make, and even the ones you don't long after the sale. Especially in this time of almost constant disruption, digital and societal, the stakes have never been higher. The question is, are you ready? Well, I am Charles Araujo, founder of the Institute for Digital Transformation, here with Frank. Introduce yourself.
Dr. Frank Renito with the Institute for Digital Transformation, Chief Scientist.
And we're here for another episode of the Digital Experience Revolution. And we're going to dive right into this with this week's trending topic, the trend line, as we call it, recognizing the fullness of the customer journey. Now, Frank, I got to tell you this. I want to start with this first piece because it sort of blew my mind. There's two people that I follow and that I enjoy kind of using as a model. One is a woman by the name of Marie Forleo, and the other is Tim Ferriss, the author of The 4-Hour Workweek, pretty well known. And both of them had this really fascinating kind of weird thing, I guess, on Instagram, all related to the George Floyd protests. Right. So in Marie's case, and I'm only going to talk briefly, we'll have links that you can go and check this out in the show notes afterward. But she shut down comments in, I think it was a Facebook group for her, what she calls her B school graduates. And she shut down these comments. It was right at the beginning of all the uprising because somebody posted something about the George Floyd incident, and she was afraid that it was going to get out of hand. And so she hit pause. As far as I know, she didn't delete any of them. She just sort of hit pause. And a number of the people, for B school graduates, just went kind of nuts over this. And then the second one was Tim Ferriss, and he posted, again at the beginning of all this, he posted a picture of a bottle of rosé, and it had this name called the La Merci Dieu. My French sucks, but and basically he said, "Hey, to my French speakers, anyone know what this means? If not, either way, it's just a really delicious bottle of rosé." And he had all of these people. I mean, it wasn't a majority, but a bunch of people basically saying, "Oh, you're tone deaf. How can you be talking about this in the midst of everything?" And this has nothing to do with the George Floyd situation itself. Mm-hmm. What made it interesting for me is the fact that these are not political commentators. These are people who run businesses, who have followings, who right. are very positive. They help people, be their better selves. And yet their customers were watching them and engaging with them long after the sale, right? Long after they'd become fans or they'd bought the book or signed up for the school, and were continuing to engage with them. And so that was sort of like the first wow moment for me.
Yeah, and what was interesting for me, because I come at it from a slightly different perspective, and that is, before I got into IT, I studied political science as an undergrad. So if you take a look at the freedom of speech issues, obviously the government has severe limitations on what they can do around freedom of speech. Very rare can they either limit it or suppress it. It's very, very clear in the Constitution. However, from the private sector is very, very, it's very wide what they can and cannot suppress. So they have to be very, very aware of what they do, what their customers are listening to, what their customers are saying, because all we have to do is look at the difference between Facebook and Twitter. Those situations. But I'm going to post anything because it's an open forum, like you're having a conversation, unless it violates policy. On the other hand, on Twitter's perspective, I'm limiting, and they can do that, and each of them are getting reactions from their customer, which is really, really fascinating.
Yeah, well, and I think, it is the big message here is the fact that your customers are engaging with you every step of the way. And so to your point, I think as a private organization anyway, you just have to be aware. You can't Absolutely. Chalk this up and say, well, it's just about how I do business. That's not the case. They're watching everything. And exactly. So at the flip side of this, I have another example also in the same sort of trend line as the flip side of this, the positive side. And Netflix, right? Who's long been a poster child on
the positive side.
Yeah.
This is all the positive side, because in my perspective, this is the sign of a healthy democracy. And being aware of their customer, no matter what side you're on, is a healthy democracy. And I think that's cool. So I think it's all positive. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I guess what I mean is from a proactive standpoint of how do you properly engage with your customer and acknowledge and recognize that this totality of their journey with you, and that you have to pay attention to that. Netflix, who has long been a leader from a hyperscale type as far as the technology side of it, I love that they're what I really think they're a leader on is this exact thing of understanding their customer and engaging with them in the right ways. So they had, in my opinion, a shocking announcement. It was covered, again, we'll have a link in the show notes in a story by Wired, but where they announced that they're going to be automatically canceling subscriptions of subscribers that aren't using their service. Now imagine that, right? You're a business, you have someone who signed up and they're not using it. Right. There's entire industries, I think, like gyms in particular, right, that their entire business model is based on that, right? They want people to sign up and not use their service. That's what
That's correct.
And then, now here's Netflix going, hey, if you don't show up, and in fairness, right, it's like I think after a year of not using it, you get a warning, and after 2 years, they just cancel your account.
Yeah.
But the mere fact that they're doing it at all just speaks volumes about how they approach their customers.
Unless I read it wrong, if you want to re-up within a certain amount of time, I thought it was like 6 months or 9 months or something like that, they'll just give you back your whole presence and configurations without any issue, and just turn it back on, which means I'm not sure exactly what that means, but obviously they're going to keep that in some sort of stasis in case you want to come back. So
I'm trying to figure out what the circumstance is. I go on vacation for 2 years and decided I forget to turn off my Netflix. I don't know, but it was still just, I think, amazing and a truly a lesson to be learned from everybody, that you need to be engaging even when your customers maybe aren't asking for it in that way. So fascinating stuff. All right, well, let's move on to our next segment. Tech notes. I don't know what we need to come up with some fancy.
Yeah, we need a theme music for that, or some big intro, right? Tech notes or something, right?
But if you're just tuning in, I know this is only our second episode anyway, but every week we talk about some of the companies that we're talking to and the interesting things they're doing and why we find what they're doing interesting and disruptive and frankly cool. The first company I want to talk about is a company called Elation, and they are a data catalog company, but I think what they're doing is sort of taking this to another level. That's why I find it really interesting and fascinating. So their basic reason to exist is they're trying to make the data cataloging function as easy as it is to, say, finding a product on Amazon or hiring a person on LinkedIn, or as they said, to be modeled after the best consumer catalogs. And if you've ever done any work within data modeling or data science, or you've had to go and find data, it's nothing like shopping on Amazon. It is nowhere near the same. And so their whole approach here is by really exposing and creating visibility. And as they said, their core foundation is this idea of trust, that a good catalog really should be all about providing context, that it's not just throwing it out there, but it needs to be something that an organization can use to kind of pull it all together. And the sum of it is that they claim that they want to become the data operating system for an organization. And I think it's aspirational. I think there's a lot of a lot of stuff that has to happen to make that work. But it's really, really interesting stuff, and I love what they're doing.
Yeah, and I think you hit it right when we talk about the theme of this particular Tech Notes session here, is the idea of context. I have data out there, and I could have data mining software, or I could have any kind of repository. But what we're looking at here is the context. In other words, I know the data is out there. Help me get there. So what I mean by context is I was on using a GPS, and I needed to get to a highway, and the GPS they gave me the data, turn right, turn right, turn right, but I had to put it in context. I said, wait a second, they're taking me around the block. So I just got out of the car, looked behind me, and I saw the sign for the interstate. So I just turned the GPS off and made a U-turn and got on the highway. So that's what I mean by like data with context. You could give me all that data, and you gave me the terms, but you didn't put it in context for me. Like just make a U-turn. It's right there.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly it. It's there's a difference. So to me, the mere fact that the system allowed you to be able to kind of step back and see the bigger picture, I think that's a lot of where the challenges come when it comes to data. Is it's easy to get lost in the specific elements of it, but be able to see it in that and again, if you go back to their model of, hey, they're trying to sort of become the Amazon for a data catalog. Well, that makes a lot of sense, right? Because that's what Amazon is fabulous with, or any of these types of services where I'm able to sort of step back. I can zoom in or step back depending on what I'm looking for. If I don't know, I can put in broader search terms and let it come. I mean, I almost hate to admit this, but sometimes when I have trouble trying to find something, I go to Amazon and start randomly searching different keywords around my problem to see ideas, and you come up with, and I think that's what Elation has the power to do for organizations. It's like, I don't even know what data I'm looking for precisely, but I know what problem I'm trying to solve, and now suddenly I have a vehicle to go and have that interaction. So
I know we want to move on, but funny you should mention that, because Google does that for me. When I was doing research work for my doctorate, I would go onto the university web library, and their query function was horrible. So I would go onto Google Scholar, issue the query, find the source, and then I'd go to the university library to get it, because anyway, there was that was my experience with context and getting there. And Google was the Amazon of data for me at that point.
Yeah, no, exactly. And you're right. We need to move on to the next one, but I think it is just interesting because it is about that experience, about the ability to consume it and find what you're looking for. And data is just one of those areas that most organizations, it's a massive roadblock. So we wish them a lot of luck. We'll have links, by the way, as a reminder in the show notes to these companies as well, if you want to check them out on your own. The second company I'm actually really excited to talk about, it's a company called Era, AERA, and they are all about creating what they call the self-driving enterprise. And if your mind goes straight to the self-driving car, that is not by accident. That's exactly what the image they're trying to convey here, where you're still in the car, you're still ultimately in control, but the car is doing a whole lot more of the work, and to the point, making a lot of the decisions around it. And so they're sort of a case study. I've certainly written about this. Others have written about it, that the real future of AI, of artificial intelligence, actually it's the other AI, which is augmented intelligence. And so what they're really all about is helping organizations automate and complement these really complex decisions that people are having to make around the bread and butter of how organizations operate, things like finance and supply chain and what have you. And what they're really creating is this decision process automation. So it's taking, core business processes like, when do you rebalance your inventory, or how do you figure out how to reduce the amount of raw material that you need in your supply chain? And so it's taking these really complex systems, processes, and tools and sort of create this layer, effectively what they call a brain, that sits in the middle of it and sits on top of these transactional systems to help people execute it. And so it's a really interesting approach. I have some more to talk about as far as some of the challenges. I think that not challenges, but they have to overcome people getting used to this, right? No, I think no different than riding in a self-driving car. It's not what you're used to, and so there's that process. But it's really cool stuff.
It does make one apprehensive, but let's get away from the emotional argument back to the practical one. Here we're again talking about context. So a typical knowledge management system has the organization's knowledge, and the person goes in and looks for the knowledge, maybe has to search for it somehow, and then with that knowledge make a decision. What we're talking about here is contextual knowledge. In other words, getting to the right knowledge at the right time, timely and contextual, and not only that, guiding you or making a decision. Now that's great, but you know me, that emotionally it frightens me a little bit, because the less control I have over decision making, makes me uncomfortable. But I understand that we need to have these kinds of things for quicker decisions in a very digital economy.
But so two things. One is, I think you nailed it. And I think this is a theme that a lot of the companies that we'll be talking about on this show sort of hit this note, and that is sort of the evolution of technology away from simply having a system of record or having data or even knowledge, which would be a level up from the raw data, right? But actually bringing to the point of engagement, bringing to the point that we can make a decision with it or take action based on that data, and to do it quickly, to do it at scale. Because like in their case, one of the things that Era, when I spoke to the executive team there, that they were talking about is the fact that the complexity within these large enterprises now is such that it's being slowed down, not because they don't have people capable of making the decision, but the process is so bogged down because there's so many data points, so many moving parts, you literally can't figure it out fast enough, right?
Mhm.
And so it's not about the people, it's about the complexity that we are now dealing with. And so this level of automation or augmentation around it is vital. And I did, to your point, by the way, I asked them that question about, do people not kind of resist that or are afraid of it or apprehensive? And they acknowledge that, yeah, at the beginning, yeah, they can be. But once they start seeing it in operation, and they have, I forgot what they call it, but they have a very open technology where you can actually see how it's making its decisions, and that allows people to become very comfortable where suddenly at some point there's this tipping
I
point.
think that's a very, very, very critical variable that we didn't actually touch upon is things go in and poof, a decision comes out. But if we can see the synapse, if you will, of the decision-making process, I think that would give a lot of people a lot more comfort. How did you get from A to B to C? That syllogism and synapse process. I don't know how you got there, but if you tell me how you got there, I have a lot more confidence in the decision.
Well, they're doing some great stuff, so I encourage you to check them out. And again, there'll be links in the show notes. All right, so Frank, let's bring this all back to our research, which is really, in the end, what this show is all about. This research we're doing about the digital experience supply chain and how organizations are transforming themselves around the customer experience. What do you see? What is the connection with everything that we've talked about today and our research?
Well, we talk about in the digital experience supply chain, what are the necessary capabilities? And I think what has come out here is the various capabilities, business capabilities, not necessarily technical capabilities, but business capabilities to understand and know your customer, be attuned to them and react to them. And if I could relate something very quickly, a non-tech company like Starbucks, if you take a look at what they're doing now with their app and how they've recognized that people need physical space to connect, that people need connection. And so they're designing their app around that to create what they call, I have to look at my notes here, this quote unquote third space or third place, excuse me. It's a really fascinating thing that a non-tech company really understanding their customer for drive-through, carry-out, seasonal drinks and whatnot. Very fascinating stuff. And not a plug for Starbucks. It's just a plug for knowing your customer and the capabilities required of a digital company. And Starbucks is a digital company. They're a non-tech company.
Yeah, well, no, I think that's the case. Both these companies, Elation and Era, are solving problems for companies that are not tech companies for the most part, right? And I think you're right. I think that our big message is that it's all about the experience. It's all about the experience. It's all about the experience. But what we can be missed in that statement is that the experience increasingly today is driven by data. And I think so that, to me, I have two big takeaways here. The first is that it's all about the end-to-end nature. So going all the way back to our stories with Marie Forleo and Tim Ferriss and Netflix, that it's this end-to-end, and I don't mean end-to-end. Again, I think people misinterpret end-to-end mean like transactionally end-to-end. Yes, that part too, but end-to-end, like as in the entire journey, from the very first moment I become aware of you as a company, and I might spend my money with you in some way, till either I'm no longer around, or you've upset me and I no longer use your product, or maybe I don't need it anymore, right? It's that entire end-to-end process, and that we have to, through that, be able to get the data we need to service them and to relay it in context, be able to find it and apply it in context. And I think if you look at some of the examples I gave with Era as an example, it's easy to say, oh well, that's all about the efficiency. Well, sort of. But guess what? If I show up at that Starbucks and they're not fulfilling their brand promise because they haven't managed their inventory well, and they can't predict what I'm going to want. And therefore, when I show up, they're out. That's creating a negative experience. Now, you can get away with it once or twice, but over time, if that happens consistently, if you are bad at these kinds of things, you're going to fail. And so when we look at the complexity that organizations are dealing with now, suddenly these two companies, and again, there's tons of companies that are doing these sorts of things, right? They become incredibly relevant to this end-to-end contextual model for how I meet the customer every step along the way, along their journey, and I meet them where they want to be. You know, that to me is the big aha in this.
And to tie that together with some other concept that we could probably do on another show is the idea of the Kano model. There are base capabilities and functions that a product or service must have, and if you don't have it, nobody's buying your service.
All right. Well, with that, I think we are out of time as usual. It's always just goes by so quickly. But I hope you guys found some value in this, and we're just going to sign off. So that is it for me. I'm Charles Rajo.
Dr. Frank Vernito, take care.
Thanks for being with us.